Thank you for joining us this evening for our second round of debates, which will address our Kentucky State Representative position. I'd like to thank first the Danville Independent School System for allowing us to host this event here at the school. We will start each candidate this evening. We drew cards beforehand, and first position this evening will go to Elaine Wilson-Reddy, and it will rotate first question to second question after that. Candidates will each have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to answer each question. The timekeepers will display a green card to mark the 2-minute mark, and they will then display the yellow card to mark 30-second warning. When the red card is displayed, the candidate's time is expired. Candidates will also have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Debating this evening for our position of Kentucky State Representative is Daniel Elliott and Elaine Wilson-Reddy. Our first question addresses the November 8th election is just around the, that is correct. The November 8th election is just around the corner, and I would like each of you to tell your constituents first why you seek the position for state representative. Secondly, why do you believe that you are qualified to fulfill that position? And thirdly, what do you offer that differs from your opponent? Answering this question first will be Elaine Wilson-Reddy.
For too long, party loyalty and divide have been the priority over the greater needs of the people. We know there's a feeling of urgency in our country and in our state. And we know that it's time for a change. I seek to bring consideration and respect back to the legislative process in order to come to a viable solution for all Kentucky citizens, no matter party affiliation. I am qualified because I'm a tax-paying citizen, I'm a professional educator, and a law school graduate. Not only do I possess the unique legal perspective on the legal process, but as an educator, I have also mastered the ability to break complex concepts down so that everyone can understand them, which translates into governmental transparency for all of my constituents. I will listen and consider all sides of an issue and not just vote along party lines, as my opponent has done throughout his entire legislative terms. State representatives are charged with doing what is best for all of their constituents. And the Commonwealth, not to feed special interest or line their personal pockets from their elected positions.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy. Next answering that question will be Daniel Elliott.
Well, thank you so much for the question. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I've had the great honor and privilege of serving as your state representative over the last 6 years. And I truly believe I have the best job in Kentucky because I represent you, the people of Boyle and Casey counties. Public service is what this is about for me. Public service is one of the most significant and worthwhile professions in our society. Every day we get up as public servants to serve you in Frankfort. I've been serving now, as I've said earlier, for 6 years, and I have the qualities of a good representative. I listen more than I speak, and the reason that's important is that when you listen more than you speak, you're able to learn what your constituents are interested in, the values that they have, the views that they hold, and then you're able to go to Frankfort and to represent them to the best of your ability. I think I would continue, if I'm reelected here, I think I would continue to be an effective representative for the 46,000 people in Boyle and Casey counties. Recently, I was named by CSG as one of the top 20 state legislative, or rather state government officials in America under 40 years old. And that award belongs to you all because you gave me the opportunity to go to Frankfort to represent you. My top priority will always be to deliver for my constituents, and I will pledge to continue to be an effective voice for you. I'm serving in a majority of 75 Republicans in Frankfurt. I'll be part of that robust majority in the House, where I'll be able to set the agenda for you. A minority member in the House of Representatives, 1 of 25, will have absolutely no say or input on the committees that that person serves on. They probably won't even get a bill voted on, honestly, and would be a very ineffective member of the legislature from this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Elliott. Our next question will address state government and be answered first by you, Daniel Elliott. Please tell me 2 issues you believe this state has failed to step up and address, and what will you do if elected to go after those issues? And please relate this back to the direct effect it will have on the businesses and people of Boyle County.
Well, thank you. The 2 issues, I think, first of all, taxes and tax reform. We have had a very antiquated tax system in Kentucky for a long time, up until 2022, when we have voted to change the tax structure to begin to tax consumption instead of income and production. Now, that income tax over the next 5 to 6 years will be gradually reduced down to 0 if we meet certain economic indicators. That will make us very competitive in our region. Tennessee, of course, does not have an income tax. They're a sales tax economy. That will make us competitive on a broad scale in our region of the United States. The other area that I find that we failed before I got to Frankfurt 2016, but we've tried to rectify, is in the pension system. As you know, the actuarial required contribution, which the short acronym is ARC, wasn't funded properly. And so we have had really a difficult time getting our arms around that problem. We have obviously contributed, since I've been there, billions of dollars to the ARC, to the pension systems, in order to shore them up, because we've made a commitment to our state employees, to our teachers, to in fact do that. And so, I'm proud to be part of a General Assembly that has funded that properly over the last 5 or 6 years to the tune of billions of dollars. And one other area I'll point out, since I have some additional time, I think we have to look at COLAs for retired state employees. Inflation now is at a 40-year high. Gas prices have been astronomical. Mortgage rates are over 7%. So our citizens are having a tough time. Social Security is going to get an 8% cost of living adjustment. So I think we need to look at a COLA for some of our retired state employees who haven't gotten that in a long time. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Elliott. Next, answering that question regarding state government will be Elaine Wilson-Reddy.
Thank you. One of the issues with state government is the failure to look for additional revenue streams. And Mr. Elliott just pointed out that our tax codes are antiquated, and they definitely are. I would work to create additional revenue streams, in part from legalizing marijuana and using the revenue stream from that, and also in legalizing sport betting. We have neighboring states that continue to get Kentuckians money, and it doesn't help feed our economy, and it doesn't help us shore up our governmental tax system and all the services that depend on what we have to support through taxes. So that would be the first thing. And the second issue is one that Mr. Elliott pointed out in his opening statement. He said that if a minority member is elected from this district, they would be ineffective. And as I stated in my opening statement, I plan to work with everyone and not vote just along party lines, because that's why things are divisive and so difficult right now. So I do listen, I will listen. I want to hear what you have to say. But I plan to work with both sides. And I plan to make sure that we reach agreements that are best for all Kentuckians and not just for those who are in a single party. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy. You will be answering our next question first, which addresses marijuana policies. This year, the President began making political movements towards altering the DEA Schedule I classification of marijuana by pardoning federal prisoners with federal charges for simple marijuana possession. Many surrounding states have also changed their legislation. Illinois and Virginia legalized marijuana in its entirety, and additional states have allowed medical marijuana. What would your vote be on, first, legalizing in its entirety marijuana, and secondly, legalizing marijuana for medical usage within the state of Kentucky?
Thank you. As I just mentioned, I'm in favor of fully legalizing marijuana. We already have 2 neighboring states that do that, and the revenue that they get from this is really tremendous. Illinois saw $424 million from marijuana revenue in 2021. If that's adjusted to the population of Kentucky, we have the potential to increase state revenue by over $150 million. As long as we listen to our citizens, as the majority of our citizens want this legislation passed. At the very least, we must allow medical marijuana. There are studies that prove how effective medical marijuana is in treating issues like chemo-induced nausea. If you've had a loved one that's had chemo, you know what that is and how awful that is. Also, people who have glaucoma have found a lot of relief from using marijuana. Mr. Elliott and I, as candidates, were tagged in a Facebook post a couple of weeks ago by a friend of a woman who lives in Casey County. The woman has pancreatic cancer. She suffers from chronic pain, vision and hearing loss, and headaches. The cancer has ravaged her reproductive organs. She has to travel out of state to get the cannabis oil she needs in order to seek relief from her tremendous pain. Why wouldn't we want our loved ones to have access to this medication so that they can have relief? I am fully supporting legalizing marijuana across the board, but at the very least, medical marijuana.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy. Next, answering that question, addressing marijuana policies, will be Daniel Elliott.
I don't support full-scale legalization of recreational marijuana. You know, maybe I'm a little old school on that, but I can still remember the TV commercials when I was a kid of an egg in a frying pan frying, and the narrator saying that's your brain on drugs. Marijuana, I think, leads to hard drugs. Some states have obviously decided that that's the best way for them to go about generating revenue and to legalize the recreational use of it. I've traveled to some of those states. I've watched some of those folks go in and out of these dispensaries, and for a while there, they had problems with the federal government's stance on it in terms of how they dealt with their revenue, with their cash. The banks wouldn't take it and so forth, and they had all this cash that they had to deal with. So I think that the federal government under President Biden is giving us some guidance on how his administration is going to treat marijuana criminally. I know that typically the federal government is not prosecuting these cases as they once were. I have supported the second part of the question. I have supported medical marijuana. I've co-sponsored the bill twice with Representative Nemes from Louisville, and I have voted twice in favor of medical marijuana against a lot of the members of my own party, believe it or not. And it did pass this past session. It died down in the state Senate. They didn't give it a vote because apparently they said they didn't have the votes to pass it. I think I agree with Governor Beshear that I think if we do adopt medical marijuana, we do need to apply a sales tax to it at some point in the transaction process. And I think that would be a revenue generator for Kentucky. Now, my party doesn't agree with that either. The leaders in my party in the House, they don't agree with taxing this because it's a medication. But it needs to be tightly regulated. And I agree with my opponent. I think the majority of Kentuckians support medicinal marijuana, and I'll continue to vote for it if I go back to Frankfort. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Elliott. Our next question will address reproductive rights and will be answered first by Daniel Elliott. On June 24th of 2021, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. There are many aspects to this decision outside of abortion, but this decision previously gave federal protection to a woman's right to choose to terminate a pregnancy. These decisions will now be determined at a state-by-state level. Answer in this: firstly, in cases of rape, incest, and imminent harm to the mother, would you be for or against upholding a woman's right to choose an abortion in Kentucky? And secondly, are you in favor of upholding the previously protected right across the board?
Well, I think abortion is probably one of the most divisive issues in American society today. Roe versus Wade in 1972 did not decide this question because it created a huge pro-life movement that has been active and strong for the last 50 years. The United States Supreme Court recently overturned Roe versus Wade, as all of you know, and that's why we're answering these questions now at the state level. I don't think anyone ever anticipated that that would happen in their lifetimes. I want to talk about the amendment that you'll be voting on this fall. And so you'll be able to go in the ballot box and vote your view on abortion, whether it's protected in the Kentucky Constitution or not. I don't think it's any secret that I'm a pro-life candidate. I have a very pro-life voting record in the legislature. I've been endorsed by Kentucky Right to Life. And so it's no secret here tonight that I'm a strong pro-life candidate. I think that the General Assembly will have a discussion in 2023, depending on how the amendment vote goes, on these exceptions. Particularly now, the life of the mother is protected under current Kentucky law. The other two exceptions, rape and incest, are, I'm going to say, I'm told less than, I'm going to say 5% of abortions involve life of the mother, rape, or incest, so they're very rare when that happens. But those are rape and incest are criminal acts against a woman, and Indiana and West Virginia have passed those exceptions. I think it's very likely that when we go back in 2023, if I'm fortunate enough to go back, that there will be some exceptions that will be in our state law. But I do not support the Roe versus Wade framework of a wide open abortion on demand society. I applaud the decision of the United States Supreme Court, and now your elected officials that you vote on and not judges will make this decision.
Thank you, Daniel Elliott. Next answering this question addressing reproductive rights will be Elaine Wilson-Reddy.
While the question asks about women's reproductive rights, the Dobbs decision, which is the basis for overturning Roe, is about a woman's right to privacy. If we erode this right to privacy, what other areas of privacy will also be denied? Lawyers are deciding if a woman can have life-saving surgery in the event of an ectopic pregnancy, if a doctor can perform a D&C if a woman miscarries, or if a woman can have a D&E when a fetus is not viable and the life of the mother is in danger. Why are lawyers and lawmakers making these decisions? Do you want your legislator to diagnose and treat cancer in a loved one? This is what reversing Roe has done and what voting yes for Amendment 2 will create. The results of the Northern Kentucky Right to Life candidate survey show that all current Northern Kentucky Republican candidates are in favor of restricting access to all forms of medical birth control. As my opponent has said, he is a right-to-life candidate, and he consistently votes along party lines. So he will most likely vote to restrict your access to medical birth control. That includes the use of those medicines for things like endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome. Finally, if you're a female who takes methotrexate for arthritis, your pharmacist can refuse to fill your prescription, as this medication can cause a miscarriage. Men will still have access to the drug, but women will not. I am 100% for women's right to privacy, their right against discrimination, and their right to make medical decisions for themselves. There is no room for government in any patient exam room, period.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy. You will be answering our next question first, which will address teachers' pay. During the last budgetary session, state employees were given a raise across the board, with the exception of school teachers. There is no debate that school teachers deserve a raise, but obviously budgets must also be met. With the current surplus in the state budget, would you be in favor of a raise for public school teachers, and why or why not?
I want you folks in the audience to think about your favorite teacher from school. We all had one. The teacher that made you feel great when you walked through the door. You saw them in the hall. They'd speak to you, ask you how your day was going. They encouraged you if they saw you feeling down. They wanted to make sure you had everything you needed. That's what our teachers do every single day in our state. Our teachers who are currently in the classroom are no different from your favorite teacher that you had when you were in school. Teachers created every single career and profession that's represented in this room this evening. Our state economy rests on the shoulders of our educators. It would take an average of $1.8 million to give all Kentucky educators an 8% raise, which is the same amount that state workers received. $1.8 million is less than 1% of the current budget surplus. The General Assembly had the power and the funding to give our professional educators raises. Not only did they explicitly refuse to give our teachers raises, they gave themselves a raise for their part-time jobs, for which they will make more than the average school teacher in our state. I fully support using less than 1% of the state budget surplus for educator raises immediately.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy. Next, answering the question addressing public education will be Daniel Elliott.
Thank you. I do want to set the record straight. I'm not opposed to birth control, and I think that was a comment, obviously, that was made that I was going to go to Frankfurt and ban birth control. I can assure you I'm not going to do that. 95% of school districts have actually raised their employees' pay this year based upon the budget that we passed in the Kentucky General Assembly. You know, I want to say I appreciate teachers. I appreciate educators. I was a substitute teacher for a year between college and law school, and so I understand, well, I don't understand other than that year that I was there, that they have a really difficult job. You know, I saw my kindergarten teacher a few years ago, and I hadn't seen her in a long time, and I was, you know, just thrilled to death to see her. So we've all had a special teacher in our lives who's made a difference for us. You know, the average teacher in Kentucky makes more than teachers in Indiana, Tennessee, and Missouri. We're 36 out of 50, which is not the best, and we can do better, but we're also not the worst. And I think sometimes you hear, you know, this argument that, you know, public education's under attack and that we're somehow myself and others in Frankfurt are working to dismantle public education. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm a graduate of a public school myself. Boyle County gave a 5% increase to all of their employees this past year. But with that being said, if a budget is ever presented to me in the Kentucky General Assembly with an increase, with a mandated increase for teacher pay, I will support that. I will support that. But I do believe that leaving those decisions to the local school districts and their school boards is the best practice, because those school boards and those school districts know what they can afford. And so the money comes down from the KDE to the school board, and then the school board is in the best position to make that decision because the teachers are employees of the school district. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Elliott. You will be answering our next question first, which addresses the public education system. With Kentucky ranking consistently near 5th in the country for poverty rankings, much of our population is dependent upon public services, specifically public education. What is your plan to protect public education and the equal access to high levels of instruction with the creation of charter schools and waivers?
Well, first of all, every child deserves a good quality public education and access to that good quality public education in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Obviously, public education is very important in our state. As I said earlier, I went to public school. I was a substitute teacher between college and law school. I don't accept the premise of the question that somehow charter schools are going to destroy public education in Kentucky. Charter schools are public in nature in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. In this past session, we passed a bill that limited charter schools to 2 areas of the state, the most populated areas of the state. That's a pilot program. We're going to see how that works. And so I totally reject the idea that somehow that's going to affect a child's education here in Boyle County or in Casey County or in the Danville district because we have a public in nature charter school in West Louisville or in northern Kentucky. So I think that's just a red herring that's been perpetuated for quite a while, unfortunately. In 2023, we appropriated $6.3 billion to the Kentucky Department of Education. In 2024, we appropriated $6.4 billion to the Kentucky Department of Education. SEEK funding was raised to the highest level it's ever been. And nearly 50% of our state budget, before we had all the federal influx of money, nearly 50% of that is dedicated to K through 12 public education and colleges and universities. So you can obviously make up your own mind on that but I hope you get the facts before you do. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Elliott. Next, answering our question addressing public education will be Elaine Wilson-Reddy.
My profession is as a professional educator. I taught in public schools for 16 years. I went to public schools. I advocate for public educators, and I fully support the public school systems in Kentucky. Charter schools and waivers have been created by the state as an alternative for those who want their children in a less burdensome environment, the very environment created by our state legislature. The Kentucky legislature has the power to remove overburdensome, expensive requirements that our public educators face every day. There's currently an unfunded mandate that local school districts pay for their safety officers. It's a state mandate, they have to have it, but it's on the local districts to pay for it. In addition, as Mr. Elliott said, for local school districts to pay for teacher raises as well. We know that with the previous administration for governor, the public schools budgets were cut drastically. After school programs were cut, funding for preschool was cut, and those numbers have never caught back up. So now we have teachers fleeing the profession. They didn't get a raise this year, which was a gut punch for them, which shows that they are not valued. We need to fully fund our public school system in Kentucky for all of our students so that every student has an equitable access to high-quality public education. Every student, not just Louisville, not just Northern Kentucky, every student. And when we do that, and we get rid of those burdensome issues that the legislature places on our educators, then, only then, will our public schools be able to thrive and grow.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy. You will be answering our next question first, addressing transportation. If elected or re-elected, what road plans do you have or believe would benefit Danville and Boyle County as a whole? Firstly, would you be in favor of a more direct route between Highway 34 to Interstate 75? And secondly, would you be supportive of an east end bypass for better access from Highway 150 to Highway 134?
So last week, my husband and I were on I-65 South, and we drove by the site of the new Grayson electric battery manufacturing plant that's going in. It's larger than you can even begin to imagine. The amount of earth that's being moved in that space is stunning. And it's right beside the interstate. And that's one of the things that manufacturers look for, is ease of access to the interstates. So I am definitely for any way that we can make it easier to get from Boyle County out to I-75 so that we can attract manufacturers and industries into our community, so that we can offer high-paying quality jobs for people who live here. That's critically important. Additionally, easier access to I-75 is going to help save lives. If you have ever had to follow an ambulance that's carrying a loved one and have them have to negotiate going up Nicholasville Road with all of those traffic lights and all of that traffic, imagine an ambulance being able to get to I-75 and get up to Lexington and not have to deal with the mess on Nicholasville Road. When minutes matter to save a loved one's life, that's what we need. So I am 100% for making it easier for us to get to I-75. I also am for finishing up the bypass to go around Danville, because I think that we all are really tired of those gigantic trucks rumbling up and down Main Street and on that little tiny wilderness road right there between Lexington and Maine. We need to get that finished so that we can get those big trucks off of our roads, because they're also tearing our roads up.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy. Next, answering the question addressing transportation will be Daniel Elliott.
Well, that's an interesting idea that I really haven't heard discussed that much, 34 to Interstate 75. Clearly, that would have to involve multiple county buy-in at the state level to get from here to 75, and probably through Garrett County and either Jessamine or Madison. So it would have to take a multi-county buy-in that would include their delegation to the General Assembly, the local government's support in order to look at that type of a project. I obviously would like to see it, would like to see the cost of it, and how long it would take to happen. I think, as most of us know, a lot of these big projects can take many, many years. But the sooner we look at something like that, the better. But that hasn't been one that's popped onto my radar screen since I've been in Frankfurt. You know, my philosophy on transportation funding is to work with the local governments, the county judges in both counties, the mayors, the fiscal courts, the area development districts, the transportation cabinet obviously has part of this as well. And so all of those folks and citizens obviously are constantly contacting me about issues that they see with roads in their area. You know, Kentucky 52 is obviously one that has been very dangerous, and we've gotten $1.2 million over the last several years to study Kentucky 52 to make sure that we have a good plan going forward to correct the safety before we spend millions of dollars. 1.2 to 4 million in Perryville Chaplain River Bridge. You know, I'm proud to have worked on that. A $2 million project at Alum Springs Cross Pike from 34 down to Corporate Drive. 1.2 million on the Buster Pike Bridge this past session that has been in disrepair. So I've been working hard on transportation issues, the connector.
Thank you, Daniel Elliott. Our next question will address the legalization of sports betting. You will be answering that question first. This weekend, the University of Kentucky beat Mississippi State in football, and Keeneland held another beautiful weekend of races at their meet. During the football game, the Kentucky Lottery posted upon the Jumbotron, touting billions of dollars it had raised for student scholarships. Just down the road from Kroger Field, tens of thousands of dollars were wagered each day on horse racing. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Arkansas all have legalized sports betting. We do not need a map to know where Kentucky fits within that group. What is, first, your position on legalized sports betting within our state? And secondly, please explain that position.
Well, I have cast a vote in the General Assembly. I voted no on this issue for the simple reason that I think all issues of gaming in the Commonwealth of Kentucky should be decided in the form of a constitutional amendment where the voters have the final decision. And we have kind of had a piecemeal approach in the legislature on gaming, on gambling, all issues of gambling that has been frustrating to me. The Kentucky Constitution is fairly restrictive on gambling. Obviously, we have the lottery, we have horse racing, we have charitable gaming. But I think from my reading of the Kentucky Constitution that we need a constitutional amendment on this. That way you get to decide what we do, how we do it, and the way forward. And I have to say that when the public makes the decision, that's direct democracy, and I'm all for that as your representative. I want to go back briefly to the other question that I got cut off on. In one of the previous transportation budgets, we were able to secure $2 million for the connector project that was discussed, the bypass project that was discussed. And so that's still in the process of looking at alternatives and in the design phase in terms of whether or not that would be a viable project. Let's see. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Elliott. Answering this question next, addressing transportation, will be Elaine Wilson-Reddy. Regarding legalized sports betting in Kentucky.
Okay, I was getting ready to talk about riding horses down the road, so.
No.
One of the challenges in considering sports betting is how it will impact our very valuable horse racing industry here in our state. The thoroughbred horse industry brings $115 million in annual revenue to the Commonwealth. And we have to make sure that we continue to support that industry. There are people here in Kentucky who go to Indiana to vote. They might, I don't know. Go to Indiana to wager on sports. Many of those same people will also wager on horse racing at Keeneland, or Churchill Downs. We need to make sure that we keep those wagers here in Kentucky and stop bleeding it to other states. The state of Indiana, just in the first 4 months of this year, collected $44.5 million in revenue just in sports betting, which if the rate keeps up will be $133 million for just 1 year. Ohio has granted sports gambling licenses to 13 Cincinnati area Kroger stores that will be in effect on January 1. Sports wagering will enhance our state by providing much-needed revenue to fix potholes and repair bridges and build a road from Boyle County to I-75 and finish the bypass around Danville. And it could also be an additional revenue stream for our public schools and maybe give our teachers a raise.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy. Our next question will address fairness ordinances, and you will be answering that question first. Currently, the state of Kentucky includes language to protect people based off of race, religion, national origin, gender, age, disability, and even smokers. Fairness ordinances are currently in place for many cities and municipalities in the state of Kentucky. These ordinances protect individuals from discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations, regardless of their gender identity and sexual orientation. Would you support this type of ordinance on a statewide level? And please explain why or why not.
Protections against discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations are protected under federal law for all of the groups of people that were just mentioned. A statewide fairness ordinance would extend those protections for more Kentuckians to have equal access to housing, employment, and public accommodations. Public accommodations are things like genderless restrooms, which many, many businesses now have. A statewide fairness ordinance will not only allow Kentuckians to move about the state, knowing that they are protected from discrimination, it will also attract more businesses and industries who look for accommodating states. To paraphrase the Gospel of Matthew 7:12, treat everyone as you would like to be treated.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy. Next, answering the question regarding fairness ordinances will be Daniel Elliott.
Well, I support fairness and fair play in employment, in in housing, in every aspect of our society. I think a statewide ordinance is not necessary because the United States Supreme Court in June of 2020 ruled in Bostick v. Clayton County that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits, obviously, sex discrimination, and that sex discrimination or gender definition includes transgender status and sexual orientation. And obviously, Title VII has a very broad application. Federal law always trumps state law, as we learned in high school. So I don't see the need for it. I know here in Danville, as I recall, there was a fairness ordinance passed several years ago, I think even before I came to went to the legislature, and other cities have done the same thing. I think that's a local decision that the local counties and cities can make, and quite frankly, I don't see the political will to make this decision in Frankfort to mandate a statewide decision on this issue. I think, and I believe that the folks of Kentucky and you are best served when we in Frankfort push as many issues down to you to decide on a local level, whether that's with your local school board, your city, and your county, and that fewer decisions are made in Frankfort. I think that's probably the best way forward, is that local governments are making those decisions for their own citizens. But in my mind, this is already illegal based upon the Bostic case. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Elliott. That concludes our questions for our debate for the Kentucky State Representative position. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to provide a closing statement. As Ms. Elaine Wilson-Reddy went first, our closing statements will begin with Daniel Elliott.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so honored to be with you tonight and so honored to represent you in Frankfort. I've just had a wonderful privilege over these last 6 years of representing you and taking your values to the state capitol. I believe I'm an effective advocate for 46,000 Boyle County and Casey County citizens. I serve in a Republican supermajority in the state legislature, and I have a say on the issues that come forward and the votes that are ultimately taken in that chamber. And I've been endorsed by the National Right or the Kentucky Right to Life, the NRA, the Chamber of Commerce, the Kentucky Fraternal Order Police, the Kentucky Realtors, and I have a 100% rating with the National Federation of Independent Businesses voting record. I've been named a top 20 state government official by the Council of State Governments in America, under 40 years old. I am somewhat, I have to say, disappointed that we didn't touch in this forum on issues related to taxes, high inflation, crime, the economy, the Second Amendment, and the issues that we see in Washington, D.C., where unfortunately one party is in total control, and we've seen out-of-control spending that has dominated our country, creating terrible inflation across America, and especially hitting our poorest citizens the hardest. Gas prices, mortgage rates that are some of the highest that they've been in years. So that's really what we should have been talking about tonight, but we didn't. But I promise that I'll keep delivering for you. That's my top priority in Frankfort. I'll keep delivering for you, and I'll be an effective voice for you in Frankfort. And as I said 6 years ago...
Thank you, Daniel Elliott.
Thank you.
Our final closing statement will be with Elaine Wilson-Reddy.
First, I'd like to thank the Danville Boyle County Chamber of Commerce, Jeff Jewell. I want to specifically thank their Public Policy Committee for putting together all these questions. I appreciate the thought and time that was spent in doing this, and greatly appreciate Jeff's patience in answering my 100 million questions that I asked him, and he answered them all, because he's a good guy. I also like to thank everybody for being here on this windy, cold night that started with snow this morning. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate your consideration and listening to what we both had to say. One of the things that you will always get from me as a legislator is the truth. And you will always get transparency. Mr. Elliott mentioned high gas prices, and he mentioned inflation. He failed to mention that this is a global issue, not just in the United States. Because we are a global economy, those are things that are handled at the federal level. So there would be no reason for us to talk about that, since we are both state representative candidates. Now, I will tell you that my focus is on state issues. I fully support completely funding our public school systems. I want to make sure that people who have lost their jobs get vocational retraining. I want to make sure that people who go to drug rehab have access to beds and training when they finish up their rehab. And I want to make sure that people who are now former felons have a permanent law that allows them to vote, because that's what they deserve. I appreciate everybody being here tonight. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Elaine Wilson-Reddy.